The UN's envoy to Syria has called for urgent talks in Geneva to ensure an orderly transition. Geir Pedersen sat down with Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor James Bays on the sidelines of the Doha Forum here in Qatar.
So I think what is important is that we is able to find a situation where there is a political way out of this. And that political way, as I said, needs to be very different from what it has been before. It needs to be a process that is inclusive of everyone, and where we really focus on that there needs now to be, unity, stability, where Syria is able to restore the sovereignty of all its territory with a new, I said we shouldn't work on the constitution, but what we need to work on is an understanding that there needs to be a new social contract in Syria that brings the Syrian people together. A lot of wounds that needs to be healed, and a lot of challenges, but that's the only way forward.
Let's speak now to Kenneth Roth. He's the former executive director of Human Rights Watch. He's conducted several investigations of rights abuses in Syria. Joins us now from Geneva. Thank you for your time. You've described the Syrian regime in the past as one of the most brutal regimes on earth. Your reaction to their fall today?
I have to say, few people are shedding any tears over the demise of the Assad regime. This is really one of the world's most ruthless regimes. And if you think about what they've done, they've executed or tortured to death thousands upon thousands of prisoners. They've used chemical weapons against their own people. They dropped repeatedly these notorious barrel bombs, filled with shrapnel, designed to maximize damage in civilian areas when those areas were held by the armed opposition. So this is a man who has been willing to do absolutely anything to retain power, with the effect that, some 12 million Syrians were forced from their homes, roughly half into exile, half displaced within the country. So, we all hope that this is an important new beginning. We don't really know that much about HTS. They say that they have reformed from the al-Qaeda past. They've been behaving better during this fighting. We just hope that this continues, and this really does mark a big positive new step for the Syrian people.
You mentioned the prisons. I mean, we've seen jubilant scenes at the main prison in Damascus and elsewhere where the opposition has gone to free people who've been imprisoned inside for years without trial, without many of them seeing their families. You've documented a lot of what's been happening in prisons in Syria under the Syrian regime. Tell us more about how many of the people got into those prisons and their treatment there.
Well, tens of thousands of people were imprisoned. What's remarkable is that we're hearing now of prisoners released where their families hadn't heard from them for decades. This is just, it's so brutal. It's so remarkable. I think the best insight we had into the prisons was when a former Syrian military photographer who used the code name Caesar escaped with photographs showing roughly 7,000 bodies. These are people who have been killed in Assad's prisons. So that gives you a sense of the magnitude of the brutality that took place here. And the people being released now, their lives have been destroyed by years and years of detention, but at least they're the lucky ones, they survived.
You mentioned the group HTS. Of course, it and some of its partners do have a violent past with allegations of conducting human rights abuses. It is also still prescribed as a terrorist organization by the UN and several governments. How concerned are you really about them essentially being in power of a country hugely divided by lots and lots of sects?
Well, I have to say, I've been heartened by the statements of Jolani, the HTS leader, stressing the diversity of Syria, stressing the importance of respecting these differences. At the same time, they've governed Idlib now, the northwestern province, for years. And, while they have not replicated Assad's brutality, it's not as if they've been tolerant of dissent. So, a lot remains to be seen. Okay. And, is HTS really going to allow some more rights-respecting version of Syrian rule to emerge?
Could you go into a bit more detail about what you mean by that? As you say, they have held control of Idlib. They have been essentially like the de facto government there for some time. As an organization, what can you tell us about their role there?
But they really did try to build up a civilian government. So they were key in allowing the transfer of humanitarian aid from Turkey into northwestern Syria. They, began to build institutions, schools. They tried to resurrect the hospitals that the Syrian and Russian governments were bombing. So in that sense, they really did try to provide services to the Syrian people and show themselves, ready to be in government in that sense. But, of course, what you didn't have in Idlib is an opposition media, opposition political parties, critics. I mean, these basic political freedoms they didn't tolerate. And I hope that, now that they've won the war, now that they're not fighting against the Assad dictatorship, that a more politically tolerant version of HTS will also emerge.
With Assad now gone and the Prime Minister essentially saying that he will allow the people to choose their next leader. What are the main things you will be watching as a human rights group when it comes to the political transition?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that, one can't just, hold a snap election tomorrow. When you've had a brutal dictatorship like this, you really do need to prepare. And so the first step should be negotiation for some kind of transitional government that allows political parties to emerge, that allows an independent media to emerge. And then you look to hold elections, a year, 2, 3 years down the road, when in fact, people have been able to prepare. And that's the kind of democratic transition that is most likely to succeed.
Okay, really good to get you inside. Kenneth Roth, former director of Human Rights Watch, speaking to us there from Geneva.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.